Hi everyone, welcome to my channel again. So as promised earlier, here I am with the second part of my video, and in today's video I'll be dealing with the poem Daffodils. I'll be critically analyzing the poem, focusing on some of the important figures of speech used by the poet. So as I have already affirmed the notion that Wordsworthian poetry is essentially based on the principle that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility that is evidently reflected throughout the poem. So as and when we are proceeding with the poem, I'm going to tell you how this poem is intimately connected, or how the characteristics of romantic poetry are found in this poem. So let's get started. Now, Daffodils is coming to the structural pattern of the poem. It follows the rhyme scheme A, B, C, which is again a rhyming couplet. So it's an example of an iambic tetrameter. Tetra means four, so it's a set of four syllables: unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. So I'll begin with the poem. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So, beside the lake, beneath the trees. So, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. So, it's an example of an iambic tetrameter. So the poet here is wondering. Now look into the word choices here. Now the poet has used the word wonder. Now when do we wonder? We wonder when we are lost in our own thoughts. We wonder when we are lost in our own lives. So the poet here is wondering without keeping any specific direction in his mind. He is aimlessly wandering. And in his solitariness, he is comparing himself to that of a cloud that floats over high on vales and hills. Vales means valleys. So just like a cloud is totally isolated from the physical world. It's isolated, isn't it? Like literally talking about the distance of the cloud, it is truly far away from the earth. It's far away from the living world. So to some extent, we can find something in common between the clouds and the poet. Just like the clouds are far away, simply the same way the poet himself is mentally out of touch with the world and the reality. So he uses a simile to make out this comparison, to bring about this comparison. Simile is a figure of speech that compares two different things, using the words as or like. It's a direct comparison. So the poet is comparing himself to that of a cloud. For example, I'll give you, her smile is as bright as the sun. So we take two distinctly different objects and we find out a similarity that exists between these two dissimilar objects. So the poet is comparing himself to that of a cloud. Just like a cloud is alienated, it's isolated in the vast expanse of the sky, the same way the poet is also alienated from the reality. Remember, reality versus illusion, reality versus imagination, one of the most important characteristics of romantic poetry. So, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So, the floating of the clouds, the quiet and smooth floating of the clouds adds a lot of solace. It adds a lot of tranquility to the mood of the poem. So suddenly, this tranquil state of the poem is interrupted in the very third line by this dynamic movement of the daffodils. So when all at once I saw a host, a crowd of golden daffodils. Now the word uses, like the poet uses the word host, crowd. These are all collective nouns which are used to indicate people. So non-living things are given human qualities here. The poet kind of brings inanimate objects to life. So where does he see these daffodils? These are yellow colored beautiful flowers. So these daffodils are to be found beside the lake and under the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So fluttering and dancing in the breeze, dance is an expression of joy. Humans dance when they are ecstatic, when they are full of strong emotions. So it is again an example of personification. In personification, we attribute human qualities to a non-living object. So flowers don't really dance or flutter. It's because of the gentle breeze that's blowing that makes these daffodils sway to and fro. So it's an excellent example of personification. Like we often say that the sun is smiling, the wind is howling, the wind is whispering through the trees, isn't it? The waves are lashing. So these are all examples of personification. So initially the poet's mood is full of uh, solitariness. He is in a reflective state of mind. He is not really depressed, but he is contemplating. He is brooding over something. He is in a deep thought. Perhaps because Dorothy was not by his side, or because he had lost his brother John, who was closely associated to him. It could be any reason, but he was not in a very happy state of mind. Coming to the second stanza. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. Now, again the poet uses a simile to compare the daffodils to the innumerable number of stars that shine in the Milky Way. When we see images of a Milky Way, we can see these clusters of thousands and thousands of stars tightly packed together. So these words, shine, twinkle, Milky Way, stars, these words, they symbolize eternity, something which is never ending, something which cannot be counted, immeasurable, uncountable. Before also in the previous stanza, the poet uses the word golden to describe the daffodils. Why golden? Not only because they are bright yellow colored, but also because they can symbolize a host of angels. And when we attribute golden to a particular object, then we assume that it is directly connected to the heaven. It has got heavenly attributes. And the poet tries to give a very regal, a very stately imagery to these daffodils by using the word golden. So I've told you these word choices are very, they are carefully chosen. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. So just like the stars are innumerable in number, and also at the same time they shine brightly on the Milky Way. Similarly, these daffodils are equally never-ending. They stretched in never-ending line. You could hardly count them along the margin of a bay. Bay, it's a water body. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Now 10,000, do you think that the poet literally stood there and counted the number of daffodils? No, not really. It is an obvious exaggeration. This is again another figure of speech, which is a hyperbole. Hyperbole is a figurative device where nothing is to be taken literally. It is an obvious exaggeration of ideas, and the poets use it in order to overemphasize a certain idea or to produce a dramatic effect. So 10,000 saw I at a glance. So these daffodils were so many in number. Their greatness in number made the poet choose on this particular phrase, 10,000. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Sprightly means full of vitality, full of energy, full of dynamism. So these daffodils are so happy. They are an element of nature, and these elements of nature are in perfect harmony with God. And Wordsworth was a strong pantheist. Now, by pantheism, we mean that we find God shining through all objects of nature. So according to Wordsworth, he found God in nature and nature in God. So he was definitely a very strong pantheist. He found a very deep connection that existed between God, humankind, and nature. Other than nature being a true healer, he found nature to be full of mysticism. The romantic poets, they drew inspiration from nature in their writings, and they all interpreted nature in their own ways. Shelley found nature to be full of power. Wordsworth found nature to be full of mysticism. Keats found nature to be a thing of beauty. Remember, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So coming back to the poem, 10,000 saw I at a glance, and tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Sprightly means full of energy, so even the daffodils seemed to dance in sheer ecstasy. It is again an example of personification. The daffodils are attributed the human quality of dancing. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. So the waves, they also looked beautiful. The waves beside them danced. Also, we refer to these dynamic movement of the waves lapping, the waves lapping at the shore, producing a perfect symphony. But to the poet, the beauty of the daffodils surpassed the beauty of the waves. No doubt the waves looked beautiful. They were sparkling due to the sunlight. But according to the poet, nothing could really match the beauty of the daffodils. They were unparalleled. They literally transcended the majesty of the waves too. So the waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. To outdo means to outshine someone, to surpass something, to transcend something. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. Jocund means happy, cheerful. Gay means equally happy. So in the lap of nature, in such a wonderful presence of nature, how can a poet not be happy? In such a state, a poet is compelled to be happy in such an exciting company of nature. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. So he gazed and gazed. He is emphasizing, he has repeated the word gaze here because he was truly impressed. He was in awe at the beauty of nature. He wondered at the beauty of nature. The beauty of nature knows no boundary. Beauty is something which is beyond human perception. I gazed and gazed. So at that point of time, he literally took in, he inhaled the invigorating beauty of nature. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. The show here refers to the majestic sight, the sight of these field of golden daffodils. So at that point of time, Wordsworth truly appreciated the beauty of nature. He enjoyed the beauty of nature. But not until later, he really acknowledged the true worth of this sight. He did not even have the slightest idea that later, much later in his life, when he'll be pensive, when he'll be lonely, this sight would give him so much of pleasure. And this sight is something that cannot be measured in any way. And this is so beautiful. The feeling is so majestic that it is beyond any definition. What wealth the show to me had brought. Wealth here is not to be taken literally. Wealth here refers to that immeasurable happiness that the poet got at that point of time while witnessing these elements of nature. How Wordsworth found beauty in objects of everyday life. The little pleasures of nature, the little beauties of nature are to be cherished. And he always knew that nature will never betray the one who truly loved her. Coming to the final stanza of the poem. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. How beautiful. So evidently the poet is in an urban setting. We all know that when Wordsworth is in a city, he is depressed. But when he is in the lap of nature, he is vitally energized. So evidently he is in a city, and he's missing his brother John. Dorothy is not by his side either. The reality is too much for him. He wants to get transported to the world of the ideal, when suddenly this entire memory of these golden daffodils flashes past before his eyes. Now how does he do that? Not everyone is a gifted poet like Wordsworth. He had that intellectual faculty to recreate emotions, to recreate the pleasure that he felt on that particular spring morning. And we all have that somewhere, sometime, some memory we would love to hold on to until we die. And for Wordsworth, that memory would be the one that he witnessed on that particular spring morning when Dorothy was with him. And he would love to hold on to that memory until he died. So, inward eye refers to the mind's eye. It refers to the poet's imagination. It's a sort of a spiritual vision that he had. And it is here that we can assume that probably Wordsworth was a mystic pantheist. It means it's a doctrine that believes God shines through all objects of nature. He found a deep connection between God, humanity, and nature. And he was of the opinion that nature did never betray the heart that loved her. So nature is a true healer. And nature is something which is beyond human perception. It is beyond our understanding. It's full of mysticism. That makes Wordsworth essentially a mystic, a pantheist. Evidently, he is a romantic poet, but above all, he is termed as a mystic. Like all of these romantic poets interpret nature in their own ways. For Coleridge, nature was full of supernaturalism. For Keats, nature was a thing of beauty. For Shelley, nature was a thing of power. And for Wordsworth, nature was full of mysticism. So he was absolutely in awe with nature. He always derived inspiration from nature. So what happens towards the last two lines, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and he's immediately ecstatic. His mood immediately gets uplifted. He's very happy. His heart is filled with pleasure and dances with the daffodils. So, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So it's alliteration, dances with the daffodils, repetition of the consonant sounds. So not only do these daffodils dance, but also the poet as well. He's so happy and he is truly joyful to have successfully been able to travel back in time and feel the same emotion that he felt when he beheld this majestic sight of golden daffodils. So it is essentially a romantic poet. It has all the elements of romanticism, like subjectivity. Subjectivity is something when poets write about their personal feelings, their personal emotions. So this poem is truly a subjective poem. So the elements of subjectivity, imagination, recollections of childhood, memory, love for nature are evidently reflected, pervading through the lines of the poem. So hopefully I could make you understand this poem, and I have touched upon the important figures of speech used here. In case you have a doubt or a query, please comment in the comment section. I'll try my level best to get back to you. I hope this was of some help to my students. So I end my lesson here. Please do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.